All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We welcome you to the Texas Southern University celebration of Constitution Day here in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. And thank you for joining us today. Again, if you're here for a class and want your extra credit, don't forget to sign your respective professor's roll. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our boss and guru, Dr. Michael O. Adams.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sheridan, that wasn't really necessary in terms of guru, right? But welcome to Constitution Day, September the 17th, 2018, at Texas Southern University. If you know the history and the purpose here, the former Senator Harry Byrd, he mandated if you receive Title IV funds, that we call it as financial aid, you're mandated to have a program or some event centered around Constitution Day. Now, I know I'm not just wearing red, white, and blue, so for patriotism, because again, the storied history of African Americans, we come to any discussion about the Constitution and the history with some trepidation, but also some ambivalence. And I shared a piece earlier talking about the double vision, and I didn't say double consciousness of W.B. Du Bois. But I think it's an opportune moment, or what I would call a teachable moment. Anytime that we can have a discussion about government and politics in terms of what's going on in our country. And I would also suggest that given the partisan fever that we see in Washington, D.C., and also that's reflected in Austin, I think as political scientists, citizens, and students, we welcome the opportunity to engage. So welcome again on behalf of the Department of Political Science at Texas Southern University. And I'm going to ask at this time, because our students are very involved here, I'm going to ask the student regent, Kennard, to come up and say a few words. And then I would be remiss, I have one faculty member, Sheridan Swartz, but also I'm going to ask that Doris Ellis, just please stand, Doris. Doris is one of our faculty persons in the Political Science Department here, and we really appreciate the work that she's doing. Kennard. Yeah.
Well, hello everybody. How's everyone doing today? Good? All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you guys for coming out today. Even if you're only here to earn extra credit, it still works. But welcome. My name is Kennard Jones. I have the honor of serving as your student regent for this school year. One of the big things about this day, Constitutional Day, and why is it so important and why is it so crucial, is because, it's important for minorities, especially young minorities, to really know where we came from, but also how our Constitution is set up. And notice I said our, because despite what they tell you, our forebears, our people work just as hard to, actually harder to start up this country and to get it going. So it is our Constitution as well. And so it's important to understand the laws and how they affect our daily lives, but also to understand how we can continue to interject those laws and make sure that it continues to work for our community and continue to work for our people as well. So my only challenge is to be as attentive as possible and to walk out this room today with some sort of knowledge of how you can interact with your community and make some change actually possible in this country. So thank you all so very much. And I know we're going to have a great discussion today as well. Thank you guys.
Okay, I really welcome the opportunity to have our speech today by Dr. Huerta because it couldn't be more timely. Those of you in my class know that we've done a little bit of study, just a cursory study of revolutions and change politically, and particularly in the sense of Ann Richards, right, who in 1994 was one of the most popular governors in the entire country, had high popularity, and lost an election. That 1994 campaign to defeat Ann Richards was the basis of the architect, sort of, or with Karl Rove as the architect, of the Contract for America. So as people say, as goes Texas, goes the United States. And we have not had a Democrat in statewide office since then. So a lot of people think this is the time that that may change, so this couldn't be more timely. And I want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Juan Carlos Huerta, who goes by Carlos Huerta. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, he's Carlos PhD. C. Huerta PhD. So he's at C. Huerta PhD. And Dr. Juan Carlos Huerta is a professor of political science at Texas A&M at Corpus Christi at Island Campus on Twitter. He joined the faculty there in 1995 and has led the university's nationally recognized first-year Learning Communities program. He regularly teaches state and local politics, public opinion, political science, research methods classes. God bless you. Dr. Huerta is active in promoting teaching and learning in political science and higher education. He served as president of the Political Science Education Organized Section of the APSA, the American Political Science Association, and was the Southwest president. His current political science research examines party identification in Texas. Wow. His prior research in political representation in teaching and learning includes publications in Social Science Quarterly and in the Journal of Political Science Education. He's the co-author of the textbook, Practicing Texas Politics, that we enjoyed so much in my 236 classes. No applause necessary. We took that book apart from start to finish and really just got a taste of as goes Texas, as goes the United States. Dr. Huerta's degrees are in political science with a BA from Texas A&M University and an MA and PhD from University of Houston, our sister institution right across the street. Those of you who know, I'm in that program now. Pray for me. So without any further ado, thank you again, Dr. Huerta. Let's welcome him.
Well, thank you for those very nice introductions. I'm so excited to be here at speaking with you at Texas Southern University this afternoon. I grew up in the Houston area. Some of you might know where Lake Jackson, Texas is, and Freeport, Texas, Surfside, just down Highway 288. So that's where I grew up, and spent a lot of time coming to Houston when I was a boy. There were no stores or restaurants or anything fun to do in Lake Jackson. So I remember we were building a house when I was a little boy. Our joy was to go furniture shopping and appliance shopping in Houston. Yeah, thank you. I was pretty bad, so maybe a little Burger King afterwards, got a little crown. Okay, it's a big day, real exciting. And so, as I mentioned, I did go to the University of Houston for my graduate programs, and I remember I lived closer to Maine and Montrose and Bissonnette area, and I'd always go down Blodgett Street back and forth right by your campus. One time, Texas Southern used to have the football games at the old Robertson Stadium at the University of Houston campus. And so it was on a Saturday, and I was either working the camp at the library, I forget what I was doing, but I was walking to the parking lot that was right by Robertson Stadium. And I was walking through there, and all these people are there. It's a big game going on. I think the Ocean of Soul was playing. And I remember there was one man, though, who just stood out. He was just so big and so strong looking. Everybody he's walking by, like, wow. And so I thought, wow, is he a professional football player? What's up with this guy? I got closer. It was Evander Holyfield. And so I said, wow, there's the champ. All these people around here, he's the toughest guy here of everybody. So great memories of Houston. And one more Houston story. I was here in graduate school when the Rockets won their back-to-back championships. And Corpus Christi, everyone loves the San Antonio Spurs. So I'm an outlier liking the Rockets. And so I love to tease those Spurs fans. Oh, we got 5 championships. I said, yeah, but a true champion can repeat. All right, until you repeat, I don't want to hear about it. When, Drexler came in and Elijah won, get that second one. All right, so enough about good memories of Houston. So today we're going to visit about the Constitution a bit, and we'll talk about potential party change in Texas. And with the Constitution, one thing I like to point out, and Dr. Adams brought this up, is we can read the Constitution and look at the words on it, and read the Declaration of Independence, and there's all these great ideas about equality and rights and all this stuff. And you're reading that, and the first thing you start thinking is, what are they talking about? Then the 14th Amendment passes, equal protection under the laws. Wait a minute, what are we talking about equal protection under the laws? People are treated differently all the time. And we see cases all the time going on. We're seeing protest demonstrations today. One thing I want to point out is, with our Constitution, there's words that are in it that we've never lived up to. We have never lived up to the ideals and words of our Constitution. We talked about the African-American experience a little bit in the introductions. The Mexican-American experience, the Latino experience, also second-class citizenship. Different types of discrimination, different kinds of prejudice, but the same thing. And it took demonstrations, it took protests, it took actions to get us closer to those ideals. And then there's backtracking. I think we're seeing a lot of backtracking right now in our ideals. And every time there's protests, every time there's demonstrations, every time people are saying, wait a minute, our rights are not here, there's backlash to that every single time. And so we've got to remember that as we're going forward, that this has been the American way. Protest, demonstration, that's what we do. And we've got to keep moving forward so those words that are written, we really do see them fulfilled. And then there's the words and constitutions. I forgot to scout out the best place to stand in the room, so if I block the screen every now and then, sorry. Will I mess you up if I move around? Okay. So one other thing I want to point out is there's also stuff, there's things that are not in the Constitution that are very important for democracy. So that's what I want to talk about today with political parties. In political science research, when we study democracies, one thing we understand is that it's viable political parties in a nation are considered an essential feature for that country being a democracy. So I can't think of any, political science can't think of any democracies that exist without political parties. And so you've got to have those. And they're not mentioned any place in the U.S. Constitution, yet a vital role in democracy. And so that's what I want to visit with you all about today is political parties. Let's see how coordinated I am here with two buttons. So, I always think the pointer's over there. So again, they're not mentioned in their essential feature. I heard in the introductory remarks, we heard about Texas. It's been a Republican state for quite some time. If you go back in history, Texas was a very Democratic state, yet those Democrats in that era were very different than the Democrats we look at today. This is the segregation South. These are very conservative Democrats and very different era. Texas is also changing a lot. And I think Houston is a great example of what Texas is really looking like today. You know, people start thinking, oh, some cowboy on a horse in West Texas in the desert, that's Texas. That's not Texas. Texas is cities like Houston. Okay, that's what Texas is. So demographics are changing in the state of Texas, and you can really see that here in Houston, in Harris County. And how's that going to affect our political system? How's that going to affect political parties? That's what I want to visit with you about. What's the evidence of party change in Texas? So I made this chart. I want to share it with you all. And we think of California, and we think about a Democratic state, right? We think, oh, you know, that Governor Jerry Brown, Democrats win everything in California. When I was an undergraduate like you, in a class like this, California was a solidly Republican state, and Texas had a Democratic governor. Things are very different today. So I made this chart, or table, I should say, and it shows, the red shows years the Republicans won the state in the presidential election. And then I showed Florida as it's also a larger state with a large African-American, large Latino population. And then Texas. And you can see California's solidly red. Again, Ronald Reagan. This is his state. Richard Nixon. Florida, we see bouncing around a little bit more. And then we have Texas, which had been solidly Democratic, as many southern states had been. Jimmy Carter, 76. And then lots of red. And that's how Texas has been. Let's see. I made here's a line chart. We love numbers in political science, by the way. So, and it's good for you to know how to read numbers. So we're going to look at numbers. And you've got here. I just showed that it's the change of the difference between the Democratic vote and the Republican vote since 1960. And so this is President Kennedy barely winning Texas, but just getting enough votes in Texas to win the presidency. You know who won in '64? That huge spike there. Lyndon Johnson, 1964. And this is Nixon winning. And then you go through, you see some dips and movements. And this is the 2016 election, all right? And Texas is one of the only nations, well, one of the only states in the nation where Hillary Clinton improved upon Barack Obama's performance in the state. So this is Barack Obama losing badly in Texas twice, and then there's Clinton doing better than he did in Texas. So let's think about some other things now. Let's keep looking at this idea. This is a population pyramid. I didn't make this. I got this from the state of Texas. The state demographer for the state came up with this one. And they presented this at my university. The census is done every 10 years, so it is getting a little old now. Okay, so this data is 10 years old. So I tell people, just add 8 to this. So this is your cohort. You all are around here, all right, because you're 8 years older than that. And what you have here, the lines aren't projecting too well here in the different colors. But I want you, this side of the pyramid is men, and this side of the pyramid is women. This is African Americans, and I don't know why it broke there. And this is also African American men. That's women. Asian Americans over here in this group, and these are Hispanics or Latinos in the women, men, and this is the white population in the state of Texas. So this is telling you how many people you've got. Up to 200,000 here, 0, and this is age. When you look at the white population, where is it widest? The middle age, right, middle age and older folks is where it's widest. And then it gets narrower as you get down here to younger people. All right? This is the one for the Hispanic population or Latino population. Where is it widest? Younger people. All right, so if you look at the overall thing, you do see that when you get to the younger folks in the state of Texas, it's people of color. Now I'm going to use the phrase people of color to encompass Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, everybody. I'm going to put them in that group. And then you have your white population. So you see with the young people, you know, even when it comes to folks your age, it's students of color. It's people of color who are becoming the biggest part of the population. Now this is really important too, because are women in this group here, are they still in prime childbearing age? No. Women in their 50s and the 60s don't have babies anymore. All right? Not a biology class, but, you know, get a certain age, it's over. And the state demographer said something they'll never forget. He said, Texas is changing. People of color, historic underrepresented minority groups will be the majority in Texas. Fact, it's going to happen. And he said there are not enough white women of childbearing age to stop this from happening. The state of Texas is changing. Now, while the African American population is growing, it's not growing as fast as the Latino population or Hispanic population in the state. This is another way of looking at it. This is looking just at Hispanics and white people and whites. And you see that the red is the white population, same thing. Now add 8, right? But there's a huge group here, and then when it comes to younger folks, it drops off, and this is the Hispanic population. Again, very young population. So how does this translate to political parties? The demographics of the state are changing. So how's that going to translate? And we know, your political science students, you know that race and ethnicity, those are factors when it comes to how people see themselves as Democrats or Republicans. Okay, that's how it is. It's one thing political science is very confident talking about. So I found some data. The University of Texas has a survey they conduct 3 times a year, and they track various measures of public opinion in the state of Texas. And this is one the most recent one I could find from June. Well, it is the most recent one in June. And it's a very simple thing here. I've got the percent who are Democrats, Independents, or Republicans by age. And you can see here that amongst all Texans, the most Republican group is those who are 60 and older. The most Democratic group are young people. That actually should be an 18, sorry, but I can't go back and edit that very easily. That's 8, so younger folks. But you've been talking about race and ethnicity. Well, let's break it down. Now, I had to use a category of people of color. Those of you taking political science classes, you might start talking about scientific polling or polls. We use surveys. One of the things that's just so frustrating when you're in our business of political science research is that these surveys seldom have big representative populations of African Americans or Latinos. So it can be very hard to start doing analyses because the numbers are too small. So what I've done instead, I had to combine POC, people of color, and whites. And what I want you to notice is when we look at the white population, again, it's older whites are the most Republican, younger whites are not as Republican. And when you look at people of color, Republicanism declines with age, and Democrats are clearly the majority there. All right, so I'm setting all stuff out of parties. So let me give you part of the background story for all this. When people declare a party identification, when people see themselves as Democrats or Republicans, one thing we political scientists know is that becomes very fixed. Once you've established you are a Democrat or a Republican, that's what you stay most of your life. I mean, there are people who change and move back and forth, but for a lot of people, once they say, you know, that's it, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, that's how it's going to be. And the thinking is that really happens when you're a young adult, your formative years or your impressionable years. Now, part of it is what we call political socialization. Some of us are raised, our parents are Democrats, or we have issues we prefer, we pick that party, others pick Republicans for various reasons. But once you get into, you know, you're an adult, I mean 18 to 29 is an adult, but you're a young adult, once you get more established, that gets really fixed. So what happens, the thinking is that when you're a young adult, that really has a big impact on your party preferences. So how do parties change then if our identifications wind up being pretty fixed? If that always stayed, Democrats would still be winning everything in Texas. Clearly that's not the case. So the thinking is for this is that what happened in Texas, and it took a long time for Texas to become a Republican state. In 1964, we saw Lyndon Johnson, huge victory. 1978 was the first election where a Republican won the governor's race in 100 years. So you get Bill Clemens winning. It wasn't until 2002 when the Republican Party actually won everything in the state of Texas. That was 24 years. Why did it take so long? What was going on here? And I'm going to suggest to you, a lot of it is about generations. Political generations really make a difference. Generational change makes a big difference. So let's go back in time. All right, 1995. I was wrapping up my studies at the University of Houston in 1995. The Rockets had just repeated as NBA champions in 1995. Very different time. Ann Richards, that we saw a minute ago, had just lost re-election. Texas is starting to become a Republican state. But look at this. The least Republican cohort are older folks. Younger folks are more Republican. Let's break it down. So now, you see, amongst older white Texans, they were the most Democratic. Younger white Texans were the most Republican. Okay, so let's think about this. They're 60 years old in 1995. So 40 years before then, 30 years before then, they were young adults, right? That puts us in the 1960s. What party dominated Texas politics in the 1960s? The Democrats did. They were raised in a very different Texas. When they were young adults in their impressionable years, they were raised and socialized as Democrats. And it looks like, into their adulthood, they stayed Democrats. Whereas younger folks here, people in the 18s and 30s, these are folks that came around during Ronald Reagan's presidency. George H.W. Bush was president. George W. Bush had been elected governor of Texas. It was a very different environment when they're in their impressionable years and learning about politics. When it comes to people of color, again, you see a Democratic identification was really high amongst older people of color. In fact, there actually were zero. The numbers are very small. When it comes, I didn't have my samples very small, but actually there were zero older people of color who were saying they were Republican in the survey. That's why it's sky high. But you see here that a little more volatility than what you've got here. All right, so let's follow folks through life, okay? I found a survey that was done in 2004. So about 9 years later. I couldn't find 2005. 9 years later. And now you're seeing that older folks are the most Republican cohort. Again, let's break it down by race, people of color here. And we see that older folks are more Republican, but also the most Democratic still. And it's younger white Texans that are very Republican. And you see still, when it comes to Dep Party, you see people of color are still more Democratic. 2015. Now look at this. This is 20 years after that 1995 survey. The older folks now are the most Republican cohort amongst whites. And amongst people of color, you see Republican identification very low across the board and Democratic identification very strong. Okay, so how did it happen? 1995, older folks are very Republican, and in 2015, 1995, older white folks are the least Republican, and then in 2015, the most Republican. What happened? They grew up, right? They moved along through time. And so I'm glad you said that, right? That's what happened. And so look at this. So I went ahead and I made a table here. I want to show you this. I made a table, and it's showing, again, here you got people of color, you got whites. And so here's the older whites in 1995. What this is doing, I'm subtracting Republican identification from Democratic identification. So if it's a Democratic group, it's going to be a positive number. If they're split between evenly, it's 0. And then a negative number means there's more Republicans in that cohort than there are Democrats. And so when you look at 1995, you can see that amongst people of color, very Democratic except for this one group. It's probably a small sample size, that's why that happened. And with whites, you see solid Republican except for which group? The oldest whites. And again, when did they come of age? The 1960s, in a different era. Maybe Lyndon Johnson was the president, got elected. Maybe Kennedy. And so you see a real big difference there. Now, going through time, 10 years later, these 18 and 29-year-olds are now 30 to 39. They stayed Republican. These 30 to 39-year-olds. Look at that, going down. They stay in Republican. But what's happened to this group? What happens to all of us eventually? Yeah, we're all going to leave at some point, right? That just happens. I mean, one of the tables showed a 104-year-old in it, and there really aren't that many 104-year-olds out there, okay? So we know that what's happening, you're seeing that replacement I'm talking about. You're seeing generational replacement. And so I'm suggesting, I think what this data is telling us, Texas had remained, in the 1990s, Texas was a competitive state, 2 parties. The Republicans are clearly making inroads, Democrats could still win. But a lot of that was being driven by older generations that were still Democrats, and as they were leaving the electorate, leaving the population, they're being replaced by another generation that's very Republican. So now states are becoming more Republican. You see when it comes to people of color remaining Democratic. In fact, becoming more. This number here shows how that generation go and became much more Democratic. In fact, overall, every group but the oldest population became more Democratic. And so this is showing that in 2015, the oldest white Texans were the most Republican. Now, what do you remember about that population distribution I showed you? Where were the most whites? The older group, yeah. So I want you to understand is there are a lot of people in this cohort. A lot. Well, what are the generations replacing this cohort? What do they look like? Yeah, a lot more people of color, a lot more diverse. There's fewer. And not only that, I would suggest, so you got people of color really the generations replacing, and we've seen much stronger attachments to the Democratic Party. And then amongst younger whites, you're seeing, while I wouldn't say that younger whites are Democrats, they're not as Republican as older generations are. So I think we're starting to see in Texas, and people might not notice this happening because we're not breaking it down by age and looking at race issues, or making the division by race as well. There's a big change going on in the state, and a lot of people are missing it. They're just looking at the overall numbers. They see statewide offices, they see presidential elections, they see state legislatures, and they go with that, not realizing there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. I remember when California made the flip, people were just shocked. What? California became a Democrat state? What happened? The demographics of California changed a lot, is what happened. And there are political events that are going on in California that really mobilized a lot of voters. The governor was passing some very harsh anti-immigration legislation at that time in California, and it really mobilized the Latino vote. So you get the Latino vote and the African-American vote together, that starts to lead some political change in California. And so now, I think in presidential elections, the Republicans don't even bother with California anymore. Again, when I was, like you, a first-year student, that was a base. That was the state the Republicans counted on. So what would happen to our politics nationally if Texas were to become competitive? Texas is the one big state Republicans can count on. It would really change things. Now, I'm prefacing all this, I'm not telling you Texas is going to change tomorrow. The message I want to get across to you is that the demographics are really changing in Texas, and there are opportunities for political parties to mobilize younger voters and see if they can get them into their party, get them socialized, and get out of that young adult group so the party is more fixed, becomes a little more permanent in that. I think that's also why you're seeing all these struggles for voting rights going on in Texas right now. I think there are folks who recognize, hey, the demographics of the state are changing, and we're starting to see a lot more, the photo ID, for example, that came out. College students really get this. I love talking to my students. I teach, introductory classes. I teach classes for majors, and I ask them, and most of them are 18. My first year students are all 18, 19, and I say, what was it like to get your driver's license? Was that a fun experience, getting your driver's license? A lot of forms, right? A lot of going down to the office, a lot of standing in line, a lot of being told you don't have the right form, come back, and you already had to miss school to go over there. It's a pain. And I have a teenage daughter. I had to help her do that, and the other one's taking her driving, right now. So if I ever look a little frazzled, I have a 15-year-old who's learning how to drive, and so the other day she didn't recognize a lane, but I'm alive. I'm here. That's good. It's a big Ford F-150, so a little more protection, I think, when I'm driving with her. But it's a pain. So that you got the photo ID thing going on, and we see we hear about voter purges in other states that are going on, and of course gerrymandering going on to try to affect the right to vote. So when we talk about living up to the ideals of our nation, we see a change going on in our nation, and I think that's all some pushback in what's going on. One of my colleagues in sociology likes to point out those in power don't like giving up power. Okay, and so one group has been winning politically. A lot of times they really don't like it when the other party starts to win. I've been around a long time now, and I remember when it was in Texas, it was Republicans who were accusing Democrats of pulling out every stop there was to try to slow down the Republican trend in the state. Harris County has been voting Democratic the last elections, and Democrats winning up and down the ballot. When I was in college, Democrats controlled a lot of local offices, but people started voting Republican for governor, president, that kind of stuff, and they would just go ahead and vote straight ticket Republican. So that means they vote for one party and they vote for all that party's candidates. And local Democrats are being wiped out by this. And they started complaining, hey, don't vote straight ticket, let's get rid of straight ticket voting and vote for the candidates. The last legislative session, so back when I was in college, Democrats wanted to get rid of straight ticket voting, Republicans were in favor of it. This most recent legislative session, the law was changed. This midterm election will be the last time we can vote straight party in Texas. Because in 2020, the straight party voting is going to be gone. Except this time, it was Democrats who were saying, let's keep straight ticket voting, and Republicans wanting to get rid of it. And a big reason was in big counties like this one, in Harris County, when people go, like in 2012, people go, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama both won Harris County, right? So people vote straight party, and they wipe out all the Republicans on the ballot. So Again, when you study politics, you start to realize that people's ideas and principles change depending on their position they're in and if they can win. So that's what's going on. So again, I don't want to make it sound like this is a perfectly predictive, what I'm saying here, but clearly Texas is changing. There's no doubt about that. That's an empirical fact. The Republican Party, its base in Texas, is older whites. And there's a lot of, it is a huge base, and that's why Texas is a very Republican state right now. And the real key point I want to understand, but things change. Generations come along. I was once a young guy, now I'm not. Okay, we move along. And so who's replacing us in the electorate? That's a real key. So that's to me, that's going to be the real key for this. And will Texas become more competitive? We'll see. I think it's an opportunity for both parties if they really want to try to go after younger voters. This will be the chance to do it. Mobilize, knock on doors, reach out to people, get them into your side there. So in my other presentation, students were asking me, so who's going to win the Senate race? I think that the Cruz O'Rourke Senate race is a good example of the changing demographics in the state. So I think that might be a how can I put it? It might be a it's like a warning. I'm trying to think of the right word, but it might be a little indicator to us that down the road this is really coming. It's like a preview. That's what I'm looking. It's like a little sneak preview of what could be happening in the state of Texas. And I would still think that Cruz is the favorite. The Texas state's been Republican for a long time. A lot of Republican voters in Texas. But when Clements won in 1978 as governor, people were shocked. Everyone thought John Hill, the Democrat, was going to win because Democrats always won. But he pulled off an upset. He lost re-election in '82, came back in '86, and then if you ever read about college football, read about the SMU scandal and Bill Clements. They come up together in the same thing. And but then it took from his election again to 2002, 24 years. It took a long time. But I think that's because he had the generational replacement. So in Texas, will there be a surprise win by a Democrat statewide? Is that going to mean it changes overnight? Probably not. But it's going to happen. Somebody's going to win statewide. And what I want to do, I've been joking around, I need to make sure I at least put this out for publication before the election, or tweet out. Or if I tweet it, it happened, right? And I'll say, look, the state's changing. So that way they can say, oh yeah, that guy down there in Corpus Christi, he got it. So anyway, those are my comments. I was visiting with your professors here. One thing I want to do is be sure to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, keep it a little informal. And that's really my favorite part when I visit with students. You can ask me about the presentation or what life is like in Corpus Christi. Our campus is on an island, if you're curious about that, with a little beach. Oh God, well, here.
Like you said, I know there's a lot of gerrymandering going on redistricting. Do you think that will combat your theory in any way?
He said about gerrymandering, will that have a kind of impact with this? I think we're first going to see the impact of the changing demographics in statewide elections, because you can't gerrymander a statewide election. All right? It's statewide, you can't do that. And so that's why I think we're first going to see indicators of the change coming in parties, if it comes, is through a statewide election. That's why I think the O'Rourke Cruz race is one to watch for that. Eventually, gerrymandering, it can take a long time, it can be injustices, but eventually you run out of spots to gerrymander, and it does happen. And so I think that when the Republicans took over Texas, they were chipping away legislatively, but they won statewide offices first. Remember, it wasn't until 2002 when Republicans won control of the legislature, Senate, and House. But in '98, they had won all statewide offices. So there's a lag, and the first thing they did after they won 2002, they called a special session of the legislature in 2003 to redraw the maps. And so now they're very favorable Republican maps in Texas. Don't hold your breath waiting for the Supreme Court to declare gerrymandering illegal. I think the Voting Rights Act has been severely damaged, and then the court really punted on making a decision. Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled against gerrymandering, but they used state law and state constitution to make that ruling, and I wouldn't expect that to happen in Texas. Over here, another one. Oh.
Suggesting by way of a response. There's the Ohio model in terms of redistricting commissions, and certainly that should be a part of the discussion. And we're talking about reframing the arguments and everything. I would actually call for a new Voting Rights Act in light of Shelby County versus Holder in terms of the nullification of Section 5. We've actually seen that here in the Pasadena case. And so there are alternative models, and it's good to hear that from the students. Thank you.
For those who might have heard it, your dean pointed out that we need a new Voting Rights Act. Given some of the recent court cases, we really do need a new Voting Rights Act, and I agree with that. Yeah, the Supreme Court, I don't agree with that decision. I forget which justice it was saying that, well, the election of so many candidates of color to office means that we don't need the Voting Rights Act anymore. It's kind of like saying, I've got an umbrella, it's raining, I'm dry, therefore I don't need the umbrella anymore. Well, you're dry because you got the umbrella. Get rid of the umbrella, you're getting soaked again. And I think that's what happened. And as soon as the court made its ruling, states started taking steps to roll things back. And a photo ID in and of itself can be an okay thing for voting. What was onerous in Texas was it was such a limited range of IDs, and they could be very hard to get. And so he'll say, sure, if my university, they're called $100 cards, our student ID cards. Well, those don't count. You can't use those. Those are pretty easy to get, and I don't know what you call yours here at Texas Southern. But so I think that's a good point. Go in the back, and then we'll come up front. Go ahead, sir.
So just from prior knowledge and just basically listening to what you stated, I know you understood, and you're basically trying to push the idea that it's generational change. So basically, as these individuals get older, they might change their political standing, or their political standing stays constant through the time. But would you say, just from because it's my prior knowledge and my opinion, that it's not as much generational change as much as the political party in charge at the moment messing up, so as a society we change? Would you say that it's more the party in charge messing up leaving to an overall societal change, or would they go hand in hand?
Well, that's a good question. He asked here about, I mentioned that once our party affiliation is pretty fixed, we don't change much, and so most time we see big changes in the aggregate of party identification, it's because of generational replacement. But parties do things all the time that don't make much sense. Does that have anything to do with it also? And there are folks, if people strongly disagree with the decision a political party makes, they will change their views. I mentioned the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act back in the 60s, and while older whites were the most likely to stay Democrats at that period, a lot of them did leave the party. But a lot stayed. That's why it's interesting, they're still the most Democratic generation. But some of them were very upset with what went on, so they changed their parties. Sometimes a party does make a big switch in what they're doing, and somebody says, that's it, I'm out of there. The political science research tells us, actually, when it comes to party, there's levels of attachment we have to parties. So some people are strong Democrats or strong Republicans. Others are weak Democrats or weak Republicans. And so that means their attachment's not as strong to the party. I mean, I'm sure you've all met folks who they would never, they'd walk over hot coals before they would vote for their party, okay? They'll skip the race before they vote for their party. Now, I know folks like that too. And then there's others who will move around a little bit. And then there's some who are independent, who say they're independent but lean for a party. Those with strong attachments are very unlikely to change. Those with weaker attachments, those are the ones who are going to change. And so, yes, parties can make decisions that will affect their support. And I'll use your phrase, they can make dumb decisions. Yeah, and it can drive people away. I mean, Lyndon Johnson, when he signed the Voting Rights Act, said, I just gave away the South for a generation. Because he knew a lot of the segregationists in the South were going to be ticked off at what he did. At the same time, he also gained the support of, when you look at partyfication, African American support is the strongest supporters of the Democratic Party in the United States.
So for us to achieve such type of change, so obviously we understand the political atmosphere as it is right now is not the most equal or not the most fair. Would we just have to wait for that generational change? Because understanding a state political party in charge and trying to get that change right now, as you stated with the Beto Cruz race right now, Texas has been a red state for a while. So would it be possible, but would it be understandable to say that we might not win, or we just have to wait for that generational change?
What I'm going to say is, I mean, sometimes you're in situations where winning is going to be a real long shot. You got to find victories you can get. What I was proposing here is that a window is opening up in Texas where change can happen. And they don't always happen that way. And so to me, it's with the demographic changes going on and the way things are going, you make change. This is a time to mobilize and get folks involved in politics. This is a time to get people to supporting your positions, because it's an opportunity's there. In politics, you know, these opportunities for change come and go. And their windows open up and you can make a change, and then that window shuts and you might have to wait a generation. It's opening right now. How wide is it open? How long is it open? I don't know. It's opening. So if you want to do something about it, now's when I would do it. The numbers are there. The mobilization, the participation is what's not there. Want to add?
I was going to add some things. There's some progressive discussions that are out there in terms of the reforms that should take place, and since this is Constitution Day, and not to take a disadvantage in terms of your electoral partisanship. But there are a number of things we can do, and I'd just like to start here today. We need statehood for the District of Columbia, all right? Certainly, I think Puerto Rico should be recognized as a state. We're talking about Constitution Day. These are some progressive things. There are different types of voting patterns out there. We should be talking about proportional representation, expanding the Congress. There are all kinds of things. So you people are the millennials. You're young people. So get involved and help drive these debates. Look at what's happening with the Supreme Court. What's wrong with expanding the size of the Supreme Court? Look at the way they're appointed. So these are all progressive ideas that we should be talking about. And I think we're at that time. We just shouldn't wait for Austin to move. No, you can't.
Now I say the time is right. This is the time to do it. And there's times when it's not the right time to do it.
Right.
You had a question?
Yes.
Here.
Yes, this is Professor Robinson. I had wanted you to elaborate a little bit more about where are the young people going who are leaving the Republican Party? And my initial thought was maybe they were becoming independent, or maybe they're dropping out. What does your research say? And secondly, you did touch on it with your answering the question, but I think we need to be explicit as to what went on to make the white people leave the Democratic Party in the first place. And you kind of alluded to it in your response.
Well, let me take these things in reverse order. So we saw across, there's a lot of research looking at party change in the United States. And when people see the country changing, when you look at the southern states, that's really where a lot of it happened. And in a way, the South didn't make much sense. You had a National Democratic Party, which was a much more moderate party, a more liberal party, and then you had the southern states on there with all these conservative white Southern Democrats, and very little African American participation, very little Latino participation in politics. So then in the 1960s, when you get the civil rights legislation going, now the right to vote's expanded, and these southern whites, they start to leave the Democratic Party. Some of them left right away. Others, younger generations came in, they were more Republican, okay? And so over time, that's why I showed the timeline, because the older Republicans, they had strong ties to the Democratic Party. They stayed Democratic longer than the younger ones did, but they still were leaving the party. And so I would argue to you that, and it's not just my argument, other political scientists have done this too. I mean, race was a big driver of the party change that went on in the American South.
That explicitly so
Okay.
that young people could understand the dynamics in which they are living.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was clearly a backlash of civil rights legislation that would happen. And in Texas, Texas is not quite the southern state. We're a little different. Well, that's just how Texas is. Texas is a different state. And so Texas, you also had the Mexican American civil rights movement going on at the same time, or a little after, very inspired by the African American civil rights movement. And so then you start getting, you have Mexican Americans advocating for change and saying we're sick of being treated second-class citizens in schools, the whole bit. But as Mexican Americans and African Americans, I'm saying Mexican Americans, most Latinos, well, at that time, most Latinos in Texas were Mexican American. But you start coming in, start having changes. And a lot of the whites said, no, this is not our party. They're going to the Republican Party. And, Lee Atwater, who was George H.W. Bush's campaign strategist, was very clear in an interview what they were doing. They couldn't use blatant language anymore, the old racist language of the 60s anymore, so they had to find more subtle ways to speak, and it's called dog whistle politics. Right, so you had to be more subtle. I'm for states' rights. I'm against busing, urban crime, that kind of stuff. So all these little code words. Oh, I'm not being racist. I just don't like the urban situation today. Well, urban situation, third war, that's what they're saying. That's a subtle way of saying it. Of course, I used to joke around that, good grief, people could, but there's some people who always deny their racism. I said, good grief, they could walk around in a white hood and we wouldn't call them a racist, but now they are, and we're still not calling them racist, so I was wrong about that. But that's what's going on. So there's backlashes, and there's research is showing that attitudes about Latinos, attitudes about African Americans are big predictors of party support right now. Those who are more negative in their assessments of African Americans, Latinos, also are the more racist and more Republican in how they're voting. And I'm not giving my opinion. I'm telling you what the research is telling us. So.
I just want to respond to Doris. We could go to Ronald Reagan, the whole concept of new federalism. Actually, he announced his campaign in Neshoba County, Mississippi, which was basically, it was driven by race. The Willie Horton ads. We can go down the list in terms of, and even to Bill Clinton in terms of, if you look at the conservative appeal to the party, and immediately after one of the elections in terms of the Democratic Leadership Coalition coalescing, getting together in terms of we're going to have a conservative agenda to appeal to these kinds of voters. And even with the selection of Al Gore, there are 2 Southerners running for president. So clearly there's an effort, and it's always been the underlying tenor and tone of race.
Yeah, so you mentioned Clinton and Democratic Leadership Council. Those who don't know, in the 80s, after the Democrats lost presidential elections very badly, there was all this talk about we need to redo the party in a more centrist, moderate way. And so that's what Clinton and Gore were both very active with that. And I always found it funny because there were liberal Democrats were very upset with this whole Democratic Leadership Coalition and Bill Clinton and Al Gore. And so then years later, you go on the road and people paint them off as some super left liberals, and I think, wow, but I remember they were criticized for being too conservative, and now you're telling us this. That tells you how things have changed in American politics. Here, the student voice right behind you.
Oh, okay. Like we're talking about, the Constitution and democracy and everything, and even like you were saying, like back in the day, like with Republican and Democratic, it seemed like a true contestation. Do you feel like it's like that now, or do you see a lot of similarities in the parties?
I think the parties are very different, and I had some friends that come up in the 2016 election who were just trying to tell me there's really no difference between them. You vote for either one, it's not going to be a different result. And I had a lot of fun going back to one of the guys. You still think that? He hasn't said anything to me, and now he's going to vote for the first time. He told me there's no point in voting. Now they learn. So that was your question, right? About differences between the parties, or?
Well, yeah, just like the contestation. Do you think like if another party was to emerge, like it would be, I guess, a little bit different? Or?
Well, my sense on that, and I think my colleagues of political science would agree with me on this one. We have a little. Political science only has one law that I'm aware of. Duverger's law, and it's one where countries with an electoral system like ours, who gets the most votes in a single member district, those systems lead to a 2-party system. Comments made.
The votes more.
Well, what happens is if you have to get the most votes to win, so you're a little party is not going to gain the most votes. It's never going to win. And if you vote for that little party, you actually might wind up voting. How can I put it? Like, for example, in the last election, 16, people would say, oh, if you don't like, you think Clinton's a conservative, vote Green. All right, so I'm assuming that if somebody who's voting for Green Party, their second choice would be the Democratic Party, and their third choice would be the Republican Party. But by voting for the Green Party, you actually you really were helping the Republican Party by doing that. And our electoral system does that. That's a flaw with the plurality. It's called the plurality system. Single member district plurality system. Okay, that's for your test. That's the system we use in the United States primarily, and it really does lead to 2 parties. And Duverger said that proportional systems, as the dean brought up, leads to that's going to get multiple parties. Because a proportional systems, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, you win seats in the legislature based on the percentage of the vote your party receives. So if you win 10% of the vote, you win 10% of the seats. If you win 10% of the vote here in an election, you're going to win nothing. You're going to be wiped out. And so in American politics, when third parties have emerged, that usually shows there's something big's going on in the country, and they take away votes from a major party. Then that major party typically responds to that threat and tries to co-opt or adopt the positions of that third party. So the third parties, when they have an impact, they damage a major party, and the major party responds to that. Yes, you got the mic right behind you. You want it?
Oh, there's like just a few of us here. This is an anecdote I think about. One of the first times I saw Ted Cruz at a rally. You're being from Lake Jackson and living in Corpus. I have to ask you if you have any Selena stories, right?
I have a great Selena story. I hope you'd ask.
My students hear me talk about Selena all the time. And,
I can't wait.
But Selena, it reminds me of going to a rally and Ted Cruz not knowing who Selena was. Like, had not heard her music. Ooh, that just, anyway, it hurts my heart. But it does beg the question. Right now, I don't know if you've had any time to follow in Houston, that we have a pretty exciting race where Jean Green is leaving Congress, and so we have a Latina up on deck as the Democratic candidate, a Latina, well, two Latina, actually, who are in our state rep seats, who are battling out for her seat. It's been a long time since we've seen that much action with, potentially sending a Latina woman to Congress, having another Latina woman fill that seat from a state rep seat. It sort of throws some different things into play. So I wondered if you had any opinions about that. While we're talking about changing demographics, a lot of people are saying this could be the year of the woman. We're seeing progressive women candidates across the country. Just wondering if you had thoughts on that. And any Selena stories.
Okay, well, I definitely have a Selena story for you. Yeah. I was here in grad school when that seat was made. I remember that very clearly when Jean Green won it. But Sylvester Reyes, he had some ethical issues at the time, and I remember all that too. All right, so my Selena story. Okay, so you're right. Selena grew up in Lake Jackson. So did I. Now, I didn't know her when I was a little kid because we went to different elementary schools. However, Lake Jackson, it's very different now, but at the time, it was not a very diverse city at all. And so there really weren't many African-American students or Latinos, Mexican-American students in the classes. And the best restaurants in the town were Pizza Hut and Luby's Cafeteria. And when Luby's Cafeteria opened up, there were lines to get in because we had nothing in Lake Jackson. It was a boring place. And so my girlfriend, Corpus Christi, is boring. I said, no, you don't know a boring town. So I'm probably in 5th grade or 6th grade. I can't remember the year at school. And a friend of mine, so my friends at school said, hey, this is a Mexican restaurant in downtown Lake Jackson. Yeah, go check it out.
Abraham Quintanilla?
Well, let me get there. So I'm happy about it. My parents are San Antonians. They're always complaining about the Mexican food in the area. And even in Houston, they always dogged the Mexican food in Houston. San Antonio was it for them. And so I come over to school, Mom, Dad, my friend told me there's a Mexican restaurant downtown Lake Jackson. Let's go check it out. Maybe it's going to be a good one. And my dad, son, I hear a little girl sings there. I don't want to hear some little girl singing. Okay. Now, years later, as I learned more about Selena, I was actually here when she was murdered. I was a grad student in Houston, University of Houston. As I'm learning more about Selena, I was familiar with her. Actually, she's bigger now than she was when she was alive. It's quite a sight. I realized she lived in Lake Jackson. And I put 2 and 2 together so fast and realized, oh my gosh, that was her restaurant, and we didn't go to it because my dad didn't want to hear some little girl singing during dinner. So, good grief. Now I can even add to that story. So I got in, my wife is a University of Houston Master's of Public Administration graduate, and she's the city secretary for the city of Corpus Christi. So she gets invited, it's a city official appointed by the city council, elections, records, helping council, that kind of stuff. So she gets invited to these different dinners, and we have one group called the West Side Business Association. It's a primarily, it started off as a very Mexican-American business association in Corpus Christi. They had their award dinner on Saturday night. So we dodged the rain and went over to the award dinner, and all I read was the attire was country chic, so I had to research what that meant. So I got my boots and just a regular shirt. I went, so I'll go. I didn't look at the invitation, and it said, keynote speaker, Suzette Quintanilla Arriaga. So that's Selena's older sister. So she gets her keynote address and answers some questions, and then she was a guest at the Convention and Visitor Bureau. So I got some friends who worked there, so I ran to their table to sit down and say, she's here, right? Yeah, okay, I want to talk to her when she comes back. Because she mentioned Selena was born in Freeport. I said, I was born in Freeport. That's my town. Freeport and Lake Jackson are right next to each other. So then she's up there. She's like royalty. Okay, everyone's taking pictures, talking to her. All the politicians running for office are there, taking pictures with her. They're so excited about having her there. Finally, I come to sit down, at the table, takes a little drink, and I turn to her and I introduce myself, and I said, I also grew up in Lake Jackson. And we talked about what it was like being Mexican American in a very white town like Lake Jackson, and the things that went on with that. And then I told her that ridiculous story, and she laughed her head off. And so I was thinking, gosh, that's the longest I ever talked to a celebrity in my life. So I don't have able to load the picture, but I got my photo with me and Suzette and my wife. So yeah. So then I said, sadly she was murdered. I was here March 31st of 1995, and I went to Corpus Christi in August of 1995. And when the trial was going on, the trial was actually held in Houston. It changed the venue. The local prosecutor, now he's running for judge in Corpus Christi. His name was Carlos Valdez, an A&M Corpus Christi political science major. And I think, he went to grad school. I want to say he went to law school here. I'll say he went to Thurgood Marshall. I think he did. So he was elected as district attorney, and he's the one who prosecuted the case. So he'll come every semester and talk to my students about the trial, the things leading up to the trial. And what really amazes me, and I'm glad you mentioned your students talk about Selena, she died in 1995. My first year students this semester were born in 2000. She had already died. When he comes to my class, the students are just so excited. They're crying, gets to the part when she gets murdered. And then afterwards, he's just mobbed. Selfies, autographs, and I hear them say, oh my gosh, I'm sending this to my mom right now. And just so excited. So it really speaks, I think, to the impact she had. And what's really tough is, I think you could objectively say when it comes to popular culture, African Americans have a few more stars, okay, than Mexican Americans do. In fact, some of the Latino stars are Cuban or Puerto Rican. We're like, hey, what's going on? There's more of us, but we don't have any stars. Selena was this close to being that star. Oh, she was so close. And Spanish was her second language. There's a great line in the movie where she talks about Mexican Americans. We're not Mexican enough for the Mexicans. We're not American enough for the Mexicans. We're not Mexican enough for the Mexicans, not American enough for the Americans. Got to be twice as good at both at the same time. And my African American, we can relate. So so it's a universal with that. So that's just really neat. So we have a huge festival now in Corpus Christi called the Fiesta de la Flor, and thousands of people from all over the world come to Corpus Christi. When I travel around, I can meet people from other Latin American nations. I mentioned Selena in Corpus Christi. Oh yeah, we know her. So, and I was in Seattle. I went to the Frida Kahlo festival, and I have a Corpus Christi shirt. I wore that. Well, I was like a star. Hey, Selena Town. That's me, So anyway, but your other part of the question, you asked a political science question, I'm sorry. It was about independence? No.
About
the local race.
Latina.
I was going to say I haven't followed it enough to know too much about it.
Or just the movement of women in the progressive movement.
Well, I got to tell you, I think women of color are the untold story in American politics. And so often people start saying, women did this, and you break it down, it's women of color are the ones who did that. You need to break down the data. But it often gets ignored. And so to me, that's one of the big real tragedies in American politics is, some of the most important activists and voters out there just get ignored. Let's go to Dayton, Ohio, and look at there instead, the union worker. But what about what's going on here in Houston and going on in Corpus Christi? So I'm hopeful. I think there are a lot of, this just the sheer numbers I mean, somebody's going to win because there's so many numbers out there. But the analysis I've seen has shown that really this year the woman Raxi is actually the year of the Democratic woman, because Republicans, I was reading, have a very short bench of female candidates running for office right now. I got my hands full following corpus politics, so just the big races in Houston. You cut me off? Okay.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I've had a great time visiting with y'all. This was a great trip. Like I said, I was looking forward to this so much. I used to drive by Texas all the time, and I was thinking, why did I never? I was such a scared graduate student. If I didn't know what I was doing, I better not go there. Now I look back, what a loser, just go. And so I would drive by campus all the time, and just, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. Gosh, I mean, what a legacy with Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland to build on. So best wishes in your studies and all that you do. And thanks for having me.
Don't forget U of H is playing TSU this weekend. So in the battle of what side of Scott? The battle of Scott Street.
Oh my goodness, how exciting. And thank you for using and practicing Texas politics as well. We really appreciate that.
Enjoy it.